All right, welcome everybody. Let's do this Algebra 2, Lesson 21. Okay, let's have this little warm-up, and it shouldn't be too bad. It says, let us have this function, x squared minus 4x minus 12. It says, find the zeros of f of x. Okay, so take your time. What does it mean to find the zeros? We've done this before, right? Okay, so what do? You have x squared minus 4x minus 12. And the idea is when you want to find the zeros, you make it equal to 0, okay? And then what's the next move to continue further? All right, take your time, pause the video, and try and figure it out. But the next move we need to do is factor, right? So what's the question you have to say in your head for you to factor this polynomial, right? Let's see if we remember. Just here, what two numbers, when you multiply them, give you C, but when you add them, give you B, right? And this is when the A is equal to 1. Over here, notice that your coefficient for the x squared is 1. So you're allowed to say this. So what two numbers, when you multiply, give you negative 12, but when you add them, give you negative 4, okay? Take your time and figure it out. But it should be, let's see. So it should be x plus 2 and x minus 6, and that equals 0. Because positive 2 times negative 6 is negative 12, and negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4. Then what do? You say x plus 2 equals 0, x minus 6 equals 0, so x equals minus 2, and x equals 6. And then you just put on a happy face because this should be easy money, right? Okay, now let's look at the next question. When we get that negative 2 and when we get that positive 6, graphically, what do the zeros of this polynomial of x, what do they represent? Okay, pause the video and try and make that connection, right? This is the question I had before, right? And what do these two numbers represent? They represent where the graph intersects the x-axis. So you know at negative 2 over here and that positive 6 over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know that the graph has to hit the x-axis at these 2 points. But what does this graph look like? Notice it's an x squared, right? And it's positive. So you know the graph looks something like this, okay? Oh, it looks something like that. Okay, so they represent where they intersect the x-axis, and this is the sketch of the graph. Okay, congratulations. Let's do the next part. Here, let us have this function g of x, and let g of x equal this, okay? So what I want you to do is find the zeros, okay? So let's say you're coming through the video because you feel very, very frustrated that you're like, mister, I can't seem to factor this. Well, let's see. If I have x squared plus x minus 18 equals 0, what two numbers when I multiply give me negative 18, but when I add give me 1? Well, let's see. How do you get negative 18 with multiplication? You could do negative 18 and 1. Let's see, negative 1 and 18. You could do negative 6 and 3, or 3 and negative 3 and 6. You could do 9 and negative 2, or you could do negative 9 and 2. And is there any other combination? 2, 3, 6. No, that's it. But you see, when you add these two, you get negative 17. Here you get 17. Here you get 3. You get negative 3. Here you get 3. Here you get, what do you get over here? You get 7. And here you get negative 7. Notice that none of these numbers, when you add them up, give you a 1, which is what you want. So this is not factorable, okay? So you can't factor this in a traditional method, right? But the question we have to ask ourselves, just because, now this is where we take our time, just because this polynomial is not factorable, does that mean that there exists no zeros or solutions for the equation? Does that mean if I graph this, this will not intersect the x-axis like it did over here? Well, let's take a look in our calculator if you want. Let's just graph this equation real quick of x squared plus x minus 18. So if I hit, let's see, y equals, oh, I already plugged it in before. Okay, so x squared plus x minus 18. Okay, I hit graph. Notice that for this graph over here, it does hit the x-axis. It hits it at 2 points. Notice it hits it at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's somewhere between -4 and -5. And the other one is between 3 and 4. So this does have two solutions, okay? They're here and here, somewhere, but we don't know exactly where they are. I mean, if I use the calculator and I look, it looks like it's -4.6 or something. But the next question we have to ask is, notice that the graph does intersect the x-axis. So that means there must be values of x that when I plug it in here, it gives us 0, and it makes the equation equal to 0. So the question we need to ask is, how do we find these solutions algebraically when the polynomial is not factorable? And let's have a drum roll, please. And it is the quadratic formula. So I think you've seen this before in your other algebra classes, but we need to review this topic. And it's not as bad as it looks for today. Maybe in a few more days it'll get a little more difficult. But for today, how do we use this to help us find where the graph intersects when the polynomial is not factorable? Okay, so that's what we need to go through. Let's take a look at the first example. Notice that, you remember when we did this example over here, we got -2 and 6. So what we're going to do is, we're going to solve this again, but instead of factoring, what we're going to do is, let's use the quadratic formula to solve for -2 and 6. So if we turn the back page, it says, using the quadratic formula, find the zeros of f of x. We already found the zeros. They're right here. But the idea is, let's find the zeros using the quadratic formula. Okay, so what is the quadratic formula? So we got to write it down. Okay, so take your time, write it down over here. You have x is equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so now what we need to do is, you see here, when are you allowed to use the quadratic formula? When you have this, when the highest degree is 2 and it's equal to 0. Now here, what is your a, what is your b, what is your c? So here, this is your a, and this is the b, and this is the c. And this is the c. Okay, so here our a is 1, right? Our b is -4, and our c is -12, right? That's what we need to do. We need to identify each part. You see how it's a, b, c, a, b, c, okay? Now we have to take these numbers and plug them into this formula. So let's see, how does it work? It says x equals negative, right? The first symbol, negative. What's the next number we're going to put in? This -4. And anytime we substitute, I'm going to put parentheses. -4 plus or minus the square root of -4 squared minus 4 plus or minus -4 squared minus 4, then times what? Parentheses, 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 parentheses. So you see, notice the a goes over here, and what's our a is 1. What's the c value? It's -12, okay? All over 2 times 1, okay? That's the first, that's the second part of the thing, right? We gotta plug everything in, and take your time. Anytime you substitute a variable, always use parentheses. Okay, so now let's do the next part. You see, we have a -4, so that's just 4 plus or minus square root -4 squared, and try and do that by yourself, right? 16. Now this part, this is where a lot of people get confused. But you see, the idea is you have to multiply this straight across. What's -4 times 1? It's a -4. What's -4 times -12? That is plus 48. Okay? And now here we have square under. And then 2 times 1 is 2. Okay? So then we have 4 plus or minus. Like here we can't do anything, but we could add these two numbers, and the square root of 16 plus 48 is 64 over 2. Now this is equal to 4 plus or minus. Now what is the square root of 64? It's 8. Okay? And that's over 2. And now you see, once we get to this point, you see how we have this plus or minus? What we have to do is we have to do a split. Okay, so we split it. Here we're going to say 4 plus 8 divided by 2, 4 minus 8 divided by 2. Okay, and what is 4 plus 8 divided by 2? That's 12 over 2, and notice that's 6. And then, hey, wasn't one of the answers 6 before over here, right? Okay, and what's the next answer? What's 4 minus 8? That's negative 4. What's negative 4 divided by 2? It's negative 2, and that was the other answer that we got over here. Okay, so the quadratic formula will always work. What I want you to do is try and do the quadratic formula with this one, and I'll show it in the next video. Okay.